The court has made its decision. The child is to be remanded to state custody.
The gavel was poised to strike, ready to sever a desperate, exhausted mother from her toddler over debts she didn't even owe. To the smirking officials and the wealthy elite looking down at her from their pedestals, Lyric was just another invisible casualty of a rigged system. They thought they had completely broken her. They didn't realize that the most feared, untouchable man in the city's underworld was watching her endure their cruelty, and he was about to burn their entire system to the ground just to claim her. Lyric knew exactly what they saw when they looked at her. She was a cautionary tale, a smudge of failure on the pristine, unforgiving marble floors of the city courthouse. She knelt on the cold stone, her worn, olive-green utility jacket serving as her only armor against the freezing air and the burning stairs. In her arms, she clutched William tightly, his small face pressed into her chest, shielding him from a world that had already calculated their worth and found them empty. The air in the vast hall felt sterile and cruel, thick with the scent of expensive cologne and institutional power. Above her, the elderly official's voice droned on, listing her fabricated debts and her supposed unfitness as if poverty were a mortal sin. She watched the well-heeled onlookers, men in crisp navy suits, women in tailored coats, whispering behind manicured hands. They didn't see a mother fighting a corrupt system, they saw a statistic, a problem waiting to be erased. The legal documentation in the official's hand trembled with finality. The state was about to sever her motherhood, and society was watching it happen with polite disgust. What Lyric didn't know was that from the back of the echoing hall, a man was watching. He stood apart from the whispering vultures, a figure of lethal stillness in a bespoke black overcoat. Cha Woo-seok did not look at the grand architecture or the blustering judge. He was looking at her. He saw the defensive curve of her spine, the exhaustion in her deep brown skin, and the fierce, protective defiance radiating from her. He didn't see a destitute debtor. He saw a matriarch under siege, holding her ground with a quiet resilience that shamed every tailored suit in the room. The official raised his hand, pointing the document like a guillotine blade ready to fall. But before he could speak the final judgment, the temperature in the room plummeted. The whispers died instantly. The crowd parted, a slow or terrified yielding as Woo-seok moved through the space he commanded simply by existing. His steps were deliberate, his presence a dark wave washing over the bright marble. He stopped right beside her. The dark ink of the tattoo on his neck pulsed, a stark warning to anyone who dared breathe. He did not look at the onlookers. He placed one firm, heavy hand on Lyric's trembling shoulder, a gesture of absolute protection. "The debt is erased," Woo-seok commanded, his low, terrifying resonance shaking the very foundations of the courthouse. His dark eyes locked onto the pale, stammering official. "And the boy is my heir." The cold floor sent a harsh chill through Lyric's knees, but she refused to stand. She held her 2-year-old son, William, tight against her chest. His little hands grabbed her old, faded green jacket. All around them, the vast courtroom felt like a giant marble trap. Above her, Judge Harrison banged his heavy wooden gavel. He looked down at her with cold eyes. "Lyric Jameson," the judge said, his voice echoing loudly. "You owe more money than you could ever make. Because you cannot pay, the state will take your child." Lyric's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She heard the rich people behind her laughing softly. Women in expensive coats pointed at her worn-out boots. Men in sharp suits shook their heads in fake pity. They did not care that her debt was a lie. They just wanted to see a poor mother lose her only joy. William whimpered, hiding his face in her neck. Lyric closed her eyes to stop the tears from falling. She tightened her arms around her baby, waiting for the final bang of the gavel that would ruin her life forever. The gavel never hit the wood. Suddenly, the heavy wooden doors of the courtroom swung open with a loud crash. A freezing wind seemed to rush into the room, silencing every single whisper. The laughing crowd froze. A tall, sharply dressed man walked down the center aisle. He wore a perfectly tailored black coat, moving like a shadow across the marble floor. It was Cha Woo-seok, the most feared Mafia boss in the city. The dark tattoo on the side of his neck showed above his white collar, making the wealthy watchers step back in fear. He did not look at the rich snobs or the angry judge. His dark, intense eyes were locked completely on Lyric and her child. Woo-sok stopped right beside her. He reached out and placed a firm, warm hand on her trembling shoulder. It was a clear sign of protection. The judge's face turned completely pale. The powerful man finally looked up at the judge. "This woman owes you nothing," Woo-sok said, his deep voice shaking the entire room. The power in the court shifted instantly. The hunted mother was no longer alone. "You cannot just stop a legal ruling," Judge Harrison stuttered, his hands shaking as he held his papers. Woo-sok did not even blink. He slowly pulled a sleek phone from his pocket and pressed a single button. "Pay the Jameson debt, all $5 million, now," he ordered into the phone. Within seconds, the judge's computer beeped loudly. The screen flashed green, showing that every single penny of the fake debt was paid in full. The entire courtroom gasped in pure shock. Millions of dollars gone in one single breath. Woo-sok slipped his phone away and looked down at Lyric. For the first time, his sharp eyes softened just a little bit. He offered her his hand. Lyric stared at his clean, strong fingers. She was terrified, but she knew this was her only chance to keep William. Holding her son tightly with one arm, she placed her shaking hand into Woo-sok's. He gently pulled her up from the cold floor. "We are leaving," he announced to the room. No one dared to speak or move as the Mafia boss led the single mother out of the marble trap. Lyric sat frozen in the back of the black, bulletproof car. William was finally asleep in her lap. Next to her, Woo-sok looked out the window in total silence. Soon, massive iron gates opened, and the car drove up to a huge, beautiful mansion. It was a hidden fortress built of dark stone and glass, surrounded by tall walls and serious guards in black suits. When they stepped inside, Lyric held her breath. The house was huge, quiet, and perfectly clean. High ceilings and rich wood floors made it feel like a modern castle. This was the dragon's den, and she was locked inside. A polite older woman bowed to them at the door. Lyric hugged William tighter. She was safe from the judge, but she did not know if she was truly safe here. She kept her eyes wide open, watching every shadow and listening to every footstep. She had to be smart. She had to stay vigilant. Woo-sok noticed her stiff shoulders and defensive posture. "You do not need to fight anymore," he said quietly. "In this house, no one will ever hurt you or your son." The next morning, a maid led Lyric into a giant dressing room. Lyric gasped. The room was the size of her entire old apartment. It was filled with rows of beautiful clothes. There were soft silk dresses, thick wool sweaters, and elegant tailored coats in deep, rich colors. There was no cheap fabric here. Lyric looked down at her old, faded green utility jacket. It had holes in the sleeves and dirt on the hem. It was the only armor she had ever known. Woo-sok stepped into the doorway, leaning slightly against the frame. "Throw that old coat away," he told her gently. "It belongs to a past that cannot touch you anymore." He walked over and handed her a gorgeous, heavy black coat that felt softer than a cloud. Lyric slipped her arms into the sleeves. It fit her perfectly. She looked in the tall mirror. She did not look like a broken, tired mother anymore. She looked strong, rich, and powerful. Woo-sok stood behind her reflection, his dark eyes watching her change. "This is your new armor," he said. "Now, they will bow to you." Woo-sok led Lyric into a dark, smoky room filled with dangerous men. They were his top commanders, and they did not look happy. Lyric stood tall in her new black coat, but her heart raced. One older man with a scar on his cheek sneered at her. "We are a powerful syndicate, boss," the man spat. "We do not take orders from a street beggar." The room went dead silent. Woo-sok did not yell. He walked slowly around the long wooden table. Without a single word, he grabbed the man by the back of his neck and slammed his face hard into the polished wood. Blood spilled across the table, bright red against the dark oak. The other men jumped back in total fear. Woo-sok pulled a white handkerchief from his pocket and wiped his hand. His dark eyes stared fiercely at his men. "She is not a beggar," he growled, for his voice low and terrifying. "She is the mother of my heir. Her word is my word. If you disrespect her again, you will not leave this room alive." Lyric watched, terrified but filled with a sudden strange sense of power. The violence of the boardroom faded when they returned to the quiet parts of the mansion. Later that afternoon, Lyric walked softly down the long hallway. She heard a tiny, happy laugh coming from the bright sunroom. She peeked around the corner and stopped in her tracks. The terrifying Mafia boss was sitting on the floor. He had taken off his dark coat and rolled up his crisp white sleeves. William was climbing on his back, giggling loudly as Woo-seok pretended to be a slow, roaring monster. The cold, dangerous look in Woo-seok's eyes was completely gone. Instead, he looked at her son with true warmth and gentle care. He caught William before the toddler could fall, holding him safely in his strong arms. Lyric leaned against the wall, feeling a tight knot in her chest slowly start to loosen. For years, she had fought the whole world alone. She had built thick walls around her heart to survive. But seeing this deadly man treat her baby with such soft, perfect kindness made her breath catch. For the very first time, Lyric wondered if she could actually trust him. Crystal chandeliers sparkled brightly in the massive ballroom. It was the biggest social event of the year. A week ago, Lyric would not have been allowed near the front door. Tonight, she walked through the entrance wearing a stunning deep red silk gown. Woo-seok walked proudly beside her, his hand resting firmly on her lower back. As they stepped into the light, the music seemed to stop. The crowd turned to look at them. Lyric recognized the faces. They were the same wealthy snobs who had laughed at her in the courthouse. Now their mocking smiles were completely gone. Instead, their eyes were wide with pure panic. A woman who had pointed at Lyric's old boots suddenly looked away in shame. Powerful men quickly stepped aside, creating a clear path for them. Some even bowed their heads out of fear of Woo-seok. Lyric kept her chin high. She did not look at the floor anymore. She looked straight ahead, feeling the solid weight of Woo-seok's protection. She realized these people were just cowards hiding behind their money. Tonight, she was the untouchable queen, and the vipers had no fangs. The heavy doors of Woo-seok's private office closed with a loud thud. The wealthy, silver-haired judge from the courthouse was pushed onto the floor. He was crying, his expensive gray suit wrinkled and covered in dust. He looked pathetic. Woo-seok sat behind his massive desk, his face a mask of cold anger. "You tried to destroy my family over a fake debt," Woo-seok said smoothly. "Now your bank accounts are empty. Your career is completely over." The judge crawled forward, begging for mercy. He looked up at Lyric, who stood quietly by the window. "Please," the broken man sobbed. "I was just following orders. Don't let him kill me." Lyric looked down at the man who had almost taken William away. A week ago, he held all the power. Now he was nothing but a helpless bug on her floor. Woo-seok looked at her. "His fate is yours to decide," he told her. Lyric did not want blood, but she wanted justice. "Let him live in the streets," she said with a cold, steady voice. "Let him feel exactly what he tried to do to me." Woo-seok smiled proudly. The quiet night was shattered by the sound of breaking glass and sudden gunfire. The attack happened quickly, and Woo-seok's guards handled it in minutes. But when the smoke cleared, Woo-seok was bleeding. In his dark bedroom, he took off his ruined shirt. A bullet had sliced a deep cut across his strong shoulder. He reached for a medical kit, but his hand slipped. Lyric stepped out of the shadows. "Let me," she whispered softly. Her hands trembled, but she moved closer. She took the clean cloth and gently pressed it against his bleeding skin. Woo-seok hissed in pain, his muscles completely tight. They were standing so close that she could feel the heat radiating from his chest. He looked down at her, his dark eyes burning with an intense, heavy fire. "You did not run," he said, his voice a low rumble. Lyric looked up, meeting his heavy gaze. "I am done running," she answered bravely. He reached up, his large, warm hand gently cupping her face. The blood and danger faded away, leaving only the sound of their breathing and a sudden, undeniable pull between them. The cool night air smelled of rain as Lyric waited for Woo-seok outside the restaurant. Suddenly, a dark silver car pulled up. A tall man with a silver snake cane stepped out. He was a dangerous triad boss, a known enemy of Woo-seok. His cold eyes looked Lyric up and down, mocking her simple elegance. "You must be the stray dog Woo-seok picked up from the courthouse," he sneered, stepping closer. He thinks he can play house with you. But you are just a weak spot. He raised his cane, pointing it right at her chest. A week ago, Lyric would have frozen in pure terror. But now, she remembered the power of her new life. She remembered William sleeping safely in his warm bed. Lyric did not blink. She did not take a single step back. She looked the dangerous boss right in the eyes with total calm. "If I am his weak spot," she said evenly, "then why are your hands shaking when you say his name?" The triad boss stopped, surprised by her fire. He realized she was no longer a victim. She was a queen. The private underground dojo was quiet, smelling of clean wood and gunpowder. Wusok handed Lyric a heavy, dark silver pistol. "To survive in my world, you must know how to protect yourself," he told her quietly. Lyric held the cold metal, her hands shaking slightly. Wusok stepped right behind her. He wrapped his large, warm hands over hers, guiding her grip on the gun. His chest pressed firmly against her back, making her heart race faster than ever. He smelled of rich sandalwood and danger. "Keep your arms straight. Look only at the target," his deep voice rumbled right next to her ear. He slowly raised her arms, holding her steady. The heat of his body was completely distracting, yet it made her feel incredibly safe. "Pull the trigger gently," he whispered. Lyric took a deep breath, squeezed her eyes open wide, and pulled. A loud bang echoed through the room, and the paper target tore right in the center. Wusok smiled against her hair. "Perfect," he murmured. He did not step away. He stayed close, letting her feel his solid strength backing her up. The ride back to the mansion was totally silent until the loud sound of a tire blowing out changed everything. The armored car swerved wildly. Wusok threw his body over Lyric, pinning her safely to the leather seat as the driver fought for control. When the heavy car finally stopped, the silence was deafening. "Are you hurt?" Wusok demanded, his hands quickly checking her arms and face. His dark eyes were wide with a rare, naked fear. Lyric reached up, her fingers grazing his sharp jawline. "I am fine," she breathed. "You protected me." The adrenaline from the near crash hummed loudly in the small space. Wusok stared at her lips, his usual cold control completely shattering. He could have lost her. The thought broke him. Before Lyric could say another word, Wusok leaned down and crashed his mouth against hers. It was a desperate, hungry kiss, filled with all the terrifying feelings he had tried to hide. Lyric gasped, then kissed him back with equal fire, wrapping her arms around his neck. In that dark car, they stopped being just a protector and a mother. They finally became equals. The sunny morning felt peaceful as Lyric sat in the huge living room. William was playing on the soft rug with a set of wooden blocks. Wusok walked into the room, wearing a sharp suit and checking his phone. The dangerous Mafia boss always softened when he saw the little boy. William looked up, his big brown eyes lighting up with joy. The toddler dropped his wooden block and reached his small arms high into the air. "Appa!" William yelled happily. The entire room seemed to stop spinning. Wusok froze right in his tracks. The phone almost slipped from his hand. He looked at Lyric, his dark eyes wide with complete shock. Lyric smiled softly, tears pricking her eyes. She nodded at him. The cold, untouchable boss dropped to his knees on the rug. He gently scooped William up, pulling the tiny boy tightly against his chest. Wusok buried his face in William's neck, his broad shoulders shaking just a little bit. "Yes, my son," Wusok whispered softly. "I am here." For a man who ruled with fear, being called Dad was his greatest prize. The elders of the Korean Mafia sat around the long dining table. They were ancient, powerful men who expected complete obedience. The oldest man tapped his cane loudly on the floor. "Wusok, it is time for you to marry," the elder commanded. "We have chosen a perfect Korean heiress for you. She will make our empire stronger." Lyric stood quietly in the corner, her heart sinking fast. She was an outsider, a black single mother with no wealthy background. She started to turn away, feeling the familiar sting of rejection. But Wusok suddenly stood up, pushing his chair back violently. He walked straight over to Lyric and took her hand in front of the most dangerous men in the city. "I do not care about your heiress," Wusiak declared, his voice cold and hard as steel. He pulled Lyric to his side, lacing his fingers through hers. This is the woman who holds my heart. She is the mother of my heir. Lyric is the only queen of this empire. If anyone objects, you can leave my table forever. The elders stared in stunned silence. Her throne was secure. Lyric sat alone in the massive library of the fortress. The only sound was the heavy rain hitting the tall glass windows. On the dark oak desk, a stack of old legal papers sat open. Wusiak had given her the files to prove that she was completely free from the corrupt court. But as she read the pages carefully, her stomach twisted into a tight knot. The numbers simply did not make any sense. Her original debt was small, just some unpaid hospital bills. But the official court papers showed millions of dollars tied to a strange underground shipping company. She traced the black ink with her trembling finger. The name on the secret property deed belonged to William's biological father, who had died 3 years ago. Why did the cruel judge attach this massive property to her small debt? Lyric felt a terrible, cold chill run down her spine. That awful courtroom day was not a random accident. It was a carefully planned trap to steal something incredibly valuable, and worse, she began to wonder how much Wusiak actually knew before he saved her. The dark hallway felt longer than usual as Lyric walked back to her bedroom. Suddenly, an older guard stepped out from the shadows. His name was Jin, and he had worked for the Mafia family for decades. He looked around nervously before speaking in a rushed whisper. "You must be careful, Miss Lyric," Jin warned, his eyes darting back and forth. "The boss did not choose you out of kindness." Lyric stopped, her heart beating wildly in her chest. She remembered the strange shipping papers she had just found. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice shaking slightly. Jin stepped closer, his face twisted in a serious frown. "Wusiak is a ruthless businessman. He knew about the shipping port attached to your son's name long before he ever went to that courthouse. He used you to get the deed." The words felt like a sharp knife slicing through her heart. The warm memories of Wusiak playing with William suddenly felt like a lie. The mole slipped away into the dark, leaving Lyric standing completely alone. The seed of heavy doubt was planted, and her beautiful new world began to crumble. The armored SUV drove smoothly through the busy city streets. Lyric held William safely in his car seat, trying to ignore the painful doubts in her mind. Suddenly, a massive black truck slammed into the side of their car. Metal crunched loudly and glass shattered everywhere. Lyric screamed, throwing her body over William to protect him. 3 masked men jumped out of the truck with heavy weapons. Lyric's driver fought back but fell instantly. The door was ripped open by a terrifying man. In that terrifying second, Lyric did not freeze. She remembered the cold metal of the pistol in the dojo. She remembered Wusiak's deep voice telling her to keep her arms straight and look at the target. She pulled the small silver gun from her designer purse. Her hands shook, but her eyes were completely focused. She aimed straight at the attacker's chest and pulled the trigger. The loud bang echoed through the street, and the man dropped to the ground. Lyric fired 2 more times, scaring the others away. She hugged her crying son tightly, realizing she was no longer a weak victim waiting for a savior. Wusiak stood in the ruined street, staring at the bullet holes in the armored car. His dark eyes were empty, totally empty of anything but pure, violent rage. Lyric and William were safe at the compound, but someone had dared to touch what belonged to him. He walked slowly back to his waiting men, pulling on a pair of black leather gloves. "Find them," he ordered. His voice was not loud, but it held the promise of absolute death. That night, the city burned. Wusiak did not send his soldiers to do the dirty work. He led them himself. He kicked down the heavy doors of the rival triad's hideout. Blood quickly stained their expensive marble floors. He moved like a dark shadow, tearing through his enemies with brutal, terrifying strength. No one was spared. He grabbed the rival boss by his expensive collar, slamming him against the wall. "You tried to kill my heart," Wusiak growled, his face covered in enemy blood. He wanted the whole underworld to know that touching his family meant the end of their lives. He was the monster they feared, and he was completely unleashed. Deep in the quiet mountains, a small wooden cabin offered perfect safety. The fireplace crackled softly, casting warm light across the small room. William was sleeping soundly in the bedroom. Woo-seok sat on the edge of the couch, his face tired and bruised from the brutal fight. Lyric sat next to him, gently cleaning a cut on his cheek. The silence between them was heavy but honest. "I was terrified," Lyric whispered, tears finally falling down her face. "I thought I was going to lose my baby." Woo-seok caught a tear with his thumb, his dark eyes filled with deep sorrow. "When I was young, I watched my mother die because my father was too weak to protect her," he confessed. His voice was raw and broken. "I promised myself I would become a monster so I would never feel helpless again. But yesterday, I almost lost my entire world." Lyric looked into his tortured eyes and saw his true soul. She put her arms around his neck, holding him tightly. In the quiet darkness of the cabin, they let go of their past pain and promised to fight together forever. The heavy iron gates of the mansion closed behind them as the black car returned to the city. The peaceful days in the cabin were over. Now the air felt thick with danger. Woo-seok walked into his command center, taking off his jacket to reveal a dark, bulletproof vest. The time for hiding was done. Lyric stood beside him, her face calm but her heart racing. Dozens of heavily armed men stood in the great hall waiting for their boss to speak. Woo-seok looked at his loyal soldiers, his dark eyes burning with deadly focus. "Tonight, we end this," he commanded, his deep voice carrying a terrifying promise. "The Triad tried to take my family. We will tear their empire apart piece by piece." Lyric watched him, feeling the true weight of his power. She was no longer a frightened mother hiding behind him. She was the queen of this dark world, standing bravely by her king. William was safely guarded upstairs. Down here, the city was about to become a battlefield. Lyric took a deep breath, ready for the violent war that was coming. While Woo-seok met with his men, Lyric slipped into his private office. Her heart pounded loudly as she typed the code into his hidden wall safe. The heavy metal door clicked open. Inside, she found a thick red folder labeled with William's name. Her hands shook as she pulled out the papers. As she read the bold black ink, the room seemed to spin. Her dead ex-boyfriend did not just leave her with bills. He secretly owned the deed to the city's largest underground shipping port. The corrupt judge had made up her massive debt to steal the port for the rival Triad boss. But the worst part was the date on Woo-seok's private notes. He knew everything before they even met in that courtroom. He did not save her out of pity or sudden attraction. He claimed William just to secure the billion-dollar shipping port for his own Mafia empire. The gentle smiles, the warm hugs, the promises of protection. It all started as a cold, calculated business deal. A single tear fell on the paper as Lyric's entire world completely shattered. The office door swung open. And Woo-seok stopped dead in his tracks. Lyric stood across the room, tears streaming down her face. She was pointing the dark silver pistol right at his chest. The red folder lay open on the desk between them. "You used us," Lyric cried out, her voice breaking with deep pain. "You only wanted the port." Woo-seok did not reach for his own weapon. He stared at the gun, then looked up at her broken, beautiful face. The cold Mafia boss looked completely terrified for the first time. "Yes," he confessed softly. "In the beginning, it was only a business strategy." He took a slow step forward, ignoring the weapon pointed at his heart. "But then you fought back. Then you smiled at me. Then William called me his father." Woo-seok reached the barrel of the gun and pressed it firmly against his own chest. "The port means absolutely nothing now," he swore, his dark eyes shining with desperate truth. "I would burn the entire city to ashes just to keep you safe. Shoot me if you must, but know I love you." Lyric stared into Woo-seok's desperate eyes. Her finger trembled on the trigger, but she could not pull it. Slowly, she lowered the heavy gun. "You taught me not to be a victim," she whispered coldly. "You taught me how to fight, but you forgot to teach me how to trust a liar." She turned away from the most dangerous man in the city. Woo-seok stood frozen in pain as she walked out of his office. Lyric quickly packed a small bag and scooped up a sleeping William. The mansion guards tried to stop her at the front door, but Woo-seok's voice echoed from the stairs. "Let them go," he ordered, sounding completely broken. Lyric walked out into the dark, rainy night. She was no longer a helpless mother running from the law. She had the secret deed hidden in her coat pocket. She finally understood her true worth. She held the key to the entire criminal underworld. She was the one with the ultimate power now. For the first time in her life, Lyric was making her own rules, and she was playing to win. The next morning, Lyric walked confidently into a high-end restaurant owned by the rival triad. She wore a sharp black suit, her head held high. Dozens of armed guards stared at her, totally shocked. The triad boss sat at the back table, tapping his silver snake cane. He smirked as she approached. "Did Woo-seok finally throw you away?" he sneered. Lyric did not blink. She pulled the folded red deed from her pocket and tossed it onto his table. The boss's eyes widened in pure greed. "I am not here to beg," Lyric stated smoothly, her voice calm and powerful. "I own the shipping port you have been killing for. I control the docks, the ships, and the money." The triad boss looked at her with sudden, serious respect. He realized she was not a weak pawn anymore. "What do you want?" he asked carefully. "I want peace," she demanded. "You will leave my family alone forever, or I will sell this port to the police." The scared, broken mother from the courthouse was completely dead. The true syndicate queen had finally taken her throne. The triad boss laughed a cold, cruel laugh that echoed in the empty restaurant. He looked at the red folder on the table and smiled. "You are very brave, Lyric," he sneered, picking up his silver cane. "But you are also very foolish. I will just take the deed and kill you." Before Lyric could even blink, a dozen armed men raised their guns right at her. She stood her ground, gripping the small silver pistol hidden in her pocket. Suddenly, the heavy glass doors of the restaurant exploded. A massive black truck smashed right into the dining room, sending tables and chairs flying everywhere. Out stepped Cha Woo-seok, wearing a dark bulletproof vest and holding a heavy rifle. His men flooded into the room, outnumbering the triad instantly. Woo-seok did not look at Lyric with pity. He looked at her with pure, burning pride. He walked over and stood firmly by her side, not stepping in front of her. "My queen makes the rules today," Woo-seok announced, his voice shaking the broken glass. "I am just here to make sure you follow them." The triad boss screamed in pure anger, ordering his men to fire. The quiet restaurant instantly turned into a loud, deadly war zone. Bullets shattered the beautiful chandeliers, raining sharp crystal down on the marble floor. Lyric did not hide. She pulled her pistol and stood back to back with Woo-seok. Their shoulders pressed together, creating an unbreakable shield of trust. Woo-seok fired his heavy rifle with perfect, terrifying speed, taking down enemy after enemy. Lyric aimed carefully, just like he had taught her in the dojo. A triad soldier rushed at them with a shiny knife, but Lyric fired twice, dropping him to the ground before he could even swing. The smell of thick smoke and burned powder filled the air. They moved together like a perfect, deadly storm. Woo-seok reloaded his weapon while Lyric covered his blind side, shooting with fierce determination. She was fighting for William's future, and Woo-seok was fighting for her heart. Within minutes, the enemy guards were completely defeated. The loud gunfire finally stopped, leaving only the sound of heavy breathing and victory. They had fought their way to total freedom. The triad boss crawled across the broken glass, totally defeated and begging for his life. Woo-seok kicked the silver cane away and looked at Lyric. He nodded slowly, giving her the final choice. Lyric looked down at the cruel man who had tried to steal her child's future. "It is over," she said with a cold, steady voice. That very night, Woo-seok's men completely destroyed the rival empire. The dangerous triad was nothing but ashes and dust. But Lyric was not finished. She took the secret shipping files straight to the highest federal police. By morning, the corrupt judge from the courthouse was dragged out of his rich home in shiny silver handcuffs. The news played on every television in the city. The wealthy officials who had laughed at her poverty were completely ruined. They lost their money, their jobs, and their freedom. The marble trap that had almost ruined Lyric's life was completely smashed. She watched the corrupt judge cry on the news, feeling a deep, peaceful sense of justice. No one would ever treat her like a piece of garbage again. The sun shone brightly into the grand library of Woo-seok's mansion. The dark clouds over their lives had finally cleared away. Lyric sat at the heavy oak desk, holding a shiny gold pen. Too honest. High-level lawyers stood quietly nearby. The red folder containing the dangerous shipping deed lay open in front of her. Lyric took a deep breath and signed her name carefully on the bottom line. With those simple signatures, the underground port was totally changed. It was legally transferred into a completely safe, protected trust fund for William. The dirty money was washed clean, and the Mafia target was permanently removed from their backs. Woo-seok watched her from the doorway, his dark eyes filled with endless respect and love. "It is done," Lyric said softly, setting the pen down. "William will be safe forever, and we are finally free." Woo-seok walked over and gently pulled her up from the chair. He wrapped his strong arms around her waist, resting his chin on her head. "You saved us both," he whispered warmly. The terrible shadows of their past were finally gone. Thousands of beautiful white roses filled the giant ballroom. The elite people of the city stood quietly, but this time they bowed their heads in true respect. Soft, beautiful music played as the heavy doors slowly opened. Lyric stepped into the room, taking everyone's breath away. She wore a stunning, sparkling black gown that looked like a midnight sky. She was no longer a tired, scared mother in a worn-out jacket. She walked down the aisle like a fierce, untouchable empress. Little William walked proudly in front of her, wearing a tiny black suit and carefully holding a velvet pillow with 2 gold rings. Waiting at the end of the aisle was Cha Woo-seok. The dangerous Mafia boss looked completely captivated by his beautiful bride. His cold exterior was melted forever by her fiery spirit. As Lyric reached him, he gently took her hands. They exchanged their rings, promising a lifetime of true loyalty and fierce love. When Woo-seok finally kissed his queen, the entire room erupted in loud cheers. The city had a new ruling family, and their unbreakable legacy had just begun. Lyric's journey leaves us with one powerful truth. Your worth is never decided by the people trying to break you. True strength is not about having a perfect past or a heavy wallet. It is about having the courage to protect the ones you love and the fire to rewrite the rules when the world is unfair. Lyric started as a mocked, exhausted mother and ended as an untouchable queen, proving that the deepest pain can build the strongest armor. What would you have done if you discovered that secret red folder? Would you have walked away or stayed to fight? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of fierce justice and unbreakable love inspired you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs a reminder of their own power, and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling stories. Thanks for watching.